This is my journey. Inspired one story at a time, a library of leaders was created. It began as a journey to learn. As time went on, it began to grow. All it needed was a platform, and this podcast was created to listen, to inspire, to share. I am a storyteller, and this is my journey. Welcome to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. I'm your host, Steve Anderson, and today our guest is Bob Kaplan, who just brought out a new book, Grappling, Leaders Striving to Improve. It's short stories, fictionalized cases meant to bring executive coaching to life, which is often a struggle, a wrestling match with yourself. Grappling is a novel approach to writing about leadership and self-improvement, and it is very readable. Bob's previous book is Fear Your Strengths. What you're best at is probably your biggest problem. He is founder and president of Kaplan DeVries. Did I say that right? DeVries?
Did.
Okay. A leadership consulting firm. Learn more at Kaplan DeVries and at his website. And Bob has a bachelor's degree in English and a doctorate in organizational behavior from Yale. He lives in New York City with his wife, Becky. So, Bob, welcome to the program. It's great to have you on today.
Thank you so much, Steve.
So, why don't you just give us a little background, a little context? You've just tell us about your journey written a couple books and what you're doing now. So, where'd you grow up and how did you get to where you are now?
I grew up in New Haven, Connecticut. Um, I have always been interested in people and helping people, and it started with my younger brother. He was the third of three, and he sort of got off on the wrong foot in second grade. And my parents said he's not as smart as you and your sister. And I knew that was wrong, and I argued with them because I had taken him under my wing and let him, at 5 years old, help me to play a hand of poker. Uh,
Okay.
and went to college wanting to major in human nature. The best thing I could find was psychology, but it was run by people who ran experiments in the lab of the medical school. I mean, in the
Uh-huh.
basement of medical school. So I opted for psychology, which, as you know, Steve, can teach you a lot about human nature. My,
Absolutely.
my first job out of college was to uh, do remedial education for high school dropouts. And one, I soon learned that their biggest problem was that they had an inferiority complex. You could tell that they clutched when put in front of a math problem or being asked to read and so on. And
Uh-huh.
after a couple of years of that, I said to myself, "You don't know anything about helping people to change." And when I was lucky enough to find a program in organizational behavior and started out in a master's program, was invited to get a doctorate, which I'd never dreamed of doing. And you know this expression, the fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows one big thing.
Yeah.
I'm a hedgehog type. There's a continuity from
Okay.
childhood right up to the present day in what I'm passionate about, what I do, which is
Yeah.
both helping people uh, with their leadership challenges and their personal challenges, and also uh, grasping, getting insight into that, and writing about it.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting. Now, the title of your book, Grappling, that's a word we don't use a lot, or I don't hear a lot. So tell me why you chose that name and what that means to you.
Well, the title is very important, and I went around and around and around and around endlessly, really looking for a title that wasn't a cliche. And somehow, you know how these things happen, Steve. It just that word occurred to me.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, so, what's your response to that word grappling?
Well, I think that I would say to me it means kind of fumbling around or kind of trying to get things in order that maybe are chaotic or just trying to grasp things and give them some order. Maybe that
Yes.
word means to me.
Yes. On one of your other podcasts, I think you said something like this: you've got to work at it. You
Yeah,
got to work at it, whatever it is, and that's why I chose it. You know, if you are struggling, if there's an issue in your life and in your leadership, you really got to get after it. You really need
yeah.
to work at it, and it's not necessarily easy. It's wrestling with yourself.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And in the book, it's there's a ton of leadership books out there, and so I thought it was interesting that you chose to write stories. So you have 8 case studies, you might say, that I believe the stories are fictitious, coming, that you wrote and you provided. But I'm interested why you chose that format to kind of make your point. And at the very end of the book, you don't really give your opinions on what you should do to help leaders and so on until the very last chapter of the book. So I'm
Right.
interested. I'm interested in your structure that you chose to do that.
Sure. This is actually my fifth book. The first four were
Okay.
co-authored, all nonfiction. And I found myself a few years ago yearning for a better vehicle for offering some of what I've learned.
Yeah.
And out of the ether, like the title Grappling, it occurred to me, why don't you try fiction? Now maybe my majoring in English, literature uh, might have influenced me. And I didn't know the first thing about writing fiction. So I got myself a first-rate editor who was also a tutor, and he taught me how to write fiction by working on each of these stories.
Oh, interesting. Well, I would say that, when people ask me like what are leadership skills, or what is your gift? What are you good at? And one of the things I always say is storytelling, because I do think that storytelling is a great leadership skill. And we just remember stories better than we remember bullet points and facts. So it makes sense.
Good. Also, I'd use case studies, but case studies are sort of dry and designed to make a conceptual point. They don't really bring the character to life usually. And
Yeah.
and I thought, look, working on yourself, trying to improve is a living thing. And the dynamic with somebody helping you, whether it's type like me or somebody in your life, that's a living thing. And let's help people experience it. I would like readers to say, oh, okay, I see better what it's like to try to bootstrap yourself.
Yeah, yeah. And when you write books, you say this is your fifth. Is it something you enjoy? Is it kind of a chore or a task that you have to be very disciplined about, or what kind of a writer are you? Because I know some people just really force themselves to do it, and others it just flows right out of them. What's your style?
In college, I had a writer's block. Jump to this book, it was pure joy every step of the way. And
Right.
you get to be a little mature over the years, or if
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
lucky. And so if it wasn't coming to me, I didn't grind away at it. I stepped away, confident that when I came back at it or between sessions, something would come to me, and I'd keep going. So it was
yeah.
pure pleasure.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So you also talk in the book. It comes up often, and I've heard you say this before too, that you're a big believer in mindset. So you must like the Carol Dweck book and kind of that concept of mindsets. And so tell me your theory and philosophy on mindsets.
Well, I've been working with senior people on self improvement for 35 years. And so often that's what it comes down to. Whatever's showing up on the outside, it has everything to do with what's going on in the person's mind.
Yeah.
Whether it's an operating assumption, this is the way I'm supposed to lead, this is not the way I'm supposed to lead, or it has to do with something with this fear
Hmm.
or desire, ambition, and those things can serve the person well, but they can also throw off their form. So the simple idea is if you want to improve, you gotta work both sides of the street. Yeah, you work on your form, but you work on what it is that threw off your form in the first place. Get that straight, and then you have a good chance of getting better.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you also talk about self-confidence, that's such an important thing to being a good leader. So how do you be very self-confident without coming across as arrogant or kind of a know-it-all?
Um, well, perhaps this is the place for us to talk about uh, the imposter syndrome,
Sure.
which of course is a lack of confidence. I
Right.
so I asked myself, so what is the imposter syndrome? It's a case of somebody who's better than they think, right?
Okay.
And that's just a short step away from saying that they underestimate themselves.
Yeah.
Let's take a moment to say, well, what effect does underestimating yourself have on a person? And I'll pose a case. Let's say a young, super smart, upwardly mobile woman who doesn't see how smart she is, how underestimates her brain power, uh, her thinking ability. What effect, if you don't mind my asking, what could that have on the way she leads?
Well, I would say that it's just that, not being sure of yourself causes you to go slower than you probably would, maybe not being as brave as you probably should be, um, and probably worried about what other people think, or how's this going to look, or how are people going to see me, how am I going to be judged if this doesn't go, and if you're feeling all those things and thinking all those things, then you're just going to approach it differently than if you're just totally confident this is the thing to do and the way to go.
Exactly. And so both things that you may hold yourself back, and also you may distract yourself by being overly concerned with how what other people think of you. There's
Yeah.
what's interesting is there's an opposite effect to holding yourself back, which is going overboard.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Overcompensate. It's an interesting thing. So
Yeah.
I'll go back to imposter syndrome. You got somebody who's suffering from that. Actually, they're better than they think. What can be done to make them to correct for that underestimate to make them more confident? A concentrated dose of positive feedback.
Yeah. Hmm.
You know, I'm in the feedback business. We don't use feedback with every single person. You can just have a conversation, a series of conversations, and get somewhere, get where you need to go. But feedback, seeing yourself as other people see you, can be very enlightening, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Scary, but enlightening.
Yes. So somebody once said, "It's the need to know and the fear of knowing."
Yeah.
To your point.
Yeah.
So what's interesting, Stephen, I'm sure you know this, is that leaders, uh, offered the positive and negative feedback. They're drawn to the negative feedback, to the criticism, the constructive criticism, like a moth to a flame.
So true. Yeah. Yeah.
And so you put yourself in the position of somebody like me, the gravitational pull is in that direction. You've got to get the person to attend to the good stuff because of the benefit.
Yeah. Absolutely. I've seen, you let's say just as a example, you give someone a performance appraisal or a talk about how they're doing, and you might go 30 minutes of how great they are and how good they've done and everything's wonderful, and then you kind of think, well, I don't want to be overly positive, so maybe I should bring up something they could work on. So you bring up the one thing that maybe they didn't perform as well or they need to work on, and guaranteed they go home and tell their spouse the one thing that they need to work on. So,
That's exactly the phenomenon.
yeah.
So, what's interesting is, okay, you save the negatives for later, go over the positive. Let's say they pay attention. They generally well behaved. They'll pay attention. We read through the material, the comments and the ratings, and it's like you're offering them in the positive feedback a glass of positive reinforcement, which they're thirsty for. Most of
Yeah.
us are thirsty for it,
Sure.
and it's like they might not take the glass they might sit back, or if they take it to take a sip and put the glass down. Isn't that curious?
Yeah, yeah. Real curious. Yeah.
It's like the way people respond to compliments.
Uh-huh.
Okay, deflect the
Mm.
compliment, um, squirm. You can see the person squirming. It's like we might take a moment. I was anticipating this conversation. So what's going on with the person? That's the reaction to praise, to appreciation, to being valued.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's been people do it very differently. I can remember a person that I worked with in my past one time made the statement. I really made me think about it. Is I grew up and my dad taught me to be very humble. Don't be a know-it-all. Don't be a smarty pants. You be very humble. And so uh, sometimes we can be overly humble. And this person told me once. He said, being overly humble is probably worse than being arrogant.
People, I think one reason people are reluctant to take in the positives is that they don't want to have an inflated ego. But if their humility is too powerful, then they end up with a deflated ego,
Yeah.
so much smaller than it has a right to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting too, I don't always like to make the distinction, between men and women. Obviously there's differences, but you don't want to generalize. But I do think that I've seen that sometimes, that women, if you say something very flattering to them, they'll often they'll often come right back and say something flattering about you. Where men a lot of times would just say, "Oh, thanks," just go from there. And so, there's a difference of again of being perceived as maybe, I shouldn't be, I should be more humble.
Exactly. So let's go back to grappling around this phenomenon that you and I are talking about. So
Yeah,
somebody has a chance to be more confident, to drop the imposter syndrome, uh, and they're they're struggling to take in the reinforcement that will help them grow and help them be stronger inside themselves.
yeah,
So grappling means that you, with the person, put your finger on what is it that's blocking the uptake of the positives. Often it's just what you said, humility. There are
yeah,
variations on that theme. And so that you put that on the table and you say, that's in the way. Let's grapple with it. So here's an example. Somebody, very senior person, number two person in the corporation, extremely effective and a wonderful person in many ways, a little too intense and can be hard on people, but nothing serious. Um, wonderful track record for like 30 years, very consistent. I ask people that I interview and the person himself or herself, give me a rating of overall effectiveness, results, leadership, whatever else you'd include in that on a 100-point scale, like we got used in school. So 90s are really good, 80s good, and so on. He got an
right,
average rating of 94, but he had trouble taking it in initially. One factor is he was raised Catholic and was taught at school and at church to be humble and not
yeah,
commit the that one of the seven deadly sins, pride. And
yeah,
he learned the lesson too well, and so it helped him. I said to him, "Can you put a name on this force that causes you to downplay your value or discount your value?" And he said, "Actually, the downplayer, it, in my mind." And
hmm,
to concretize that, to make sort of an object out of it, helped him over the months to eventually move it aside enough to like a year later, he got on the phone with me on a video call and he said, "Bob, I'm more confident. I'm more comfortable in my own skin."
yeah, yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. Now, one of the things that I also noticed in your book that you say that I thought was interesting is you don't really like to use the word coach. You use the word guide, right? So tell me about that nuance. What's your issue there?
That's a good way to put it. What's my issue? You know, we started out uh, doing this type of work before there was an executive coaching field, and I don't particularly care for fads, and so now what we do is faddish, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
That's one thing. I'm also always looking for fresh language, and it seems to me a guide is a good way to describe somebody in my capacity, any helping professional.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
So that's my answer to your question.
I like that. I like that. Another thing that I thought was interesting too was, we just need to deal with, perception versus clarity. Our perception of things, my perception compared to your perception of the same thing in front of us could be very different. And so how do we clarify and come to clarity of seeing and understanding the same thing in the same way?
I've often seen that rage at senior levels uh, over uh, how good somebody is. And organizations tend to have these calibration meetings, calibrating the value, the talent, and the potential performance
Hmm.
and the potential of somebody. And you got somebody on one side of the company singing that person's praises, assigning high value, and that person's in the upper right of the nine box model, performance and
Yeah,
potential, and somebody else rates the person much lower, and they cannot agree. And so it's just a discrepancy that gets in the way. So
yeah,
will the real person, the real talent stand up? They don't get one answer to that question.
yeah, yeah. It's really really interesting. You also talk about that we all have these emotional scars that bring us down. So in your guiding or coaching,
Mhm.
is it do you try and um, reveal those emotional scars and talk about those emotional scars, or do you think that that's too personal to what you do with your clients?
My attitude is sort of being a psychotherapist and sort of crossing that line, which to me has a lot to do with how serious is the person's problem. But
Uh-huh.
history informs the present, right? And a person's history informs their present, the way they lead and what motivates them. So, and you saw in the stories, one case is the woman who, as a child, was told by her father, "You'll never amount to anything,"
Yeah.
and she fought that. It was just had the sort of makeup that allowed her to rise above that circumstance and the other difficult circumstances in her childhood. Um, but it dampened it hurt her. It hampered her relationships. And she, as a senior person, was still worried about whether people like her. And so what did she do? That it stunted her relationships.
Hmm.
So it was worth revisiting the sort of the mental posture that she was, the legacy from being told that as a kid, in order to help her sort of again bracket that and realize that she is likable, she can be likable, and she can be valued interpersonally.
Yeah. And I've asked this to many of my guests before because it's just intriguing to me. Where you have this background, this organizational behavioral background, and so you understand a lot of this. Yet I don't think you're a clinical psychologist. So do you ever worry that unveiling some of these emotional scars or kind of going deep that you might take somebody somewhere where you're not qualified or you're not experienced enough to help them out of it? Do you ever worry about that, or how do you approach that?
Well, it is a line you don't want to cross, to your point.
Yeah.
Um, Part of it is and you saw it in the last section of the book, tread lightly,
Hmm.
never force anything. on somebody. It's like leading a horse to water. And if the horse doesn't drink, you back up and try it from another angle. And you keep trying, and they drink or they don't drink, but you don't shove their head in it. So there's a commitment to being constructive, to doing no harm, which helps us stay on the right side of that line. Also, if somebody's not just garden variety neurotic, but
Yeah.
really struggling personally, we refer the person. We
Yeah.
we often work in teams, and one of the people on the team has a clinical background, a coaching, a counseling background, what have you, and that person
Yeah.
doesn't use those skills on the leader, but knows well where to draw the line.
Right, right. And so have you in the past recommended to clients, I think, you could benefit from some counseling.
Definitely,
Yeah.
definitely, all the
Yeah.
time.
That's probably not an easy conversation to have with a client.
No, right. Of course, it varies all over the place with the individual. Some people, this continuum of some people are open and relatively non-defensive, and that has to do with how well put together they are in the first place. And then there are people who are very self-protective, and so the response you get to a suggestion like that has to do with where they are in that continuum.
Yeah, absolutely. You also talk a little bit in the book about, that we have this addiction to wanting more. It's just like, oh, I've got to do more. I've got to be more. I've got to do this. And then there's I always look at the juxtaposition of a statement like that to saying, yeah, but if you are comfortable where you're at and you don't have the drive, then you maybe don't accomplish a higher level of what you're trying to do. So obviously there's a balance there, but you think a lot of people fall into that category of just always wanting more, never satisfied.
Plenty of people do. The expansive types that tend to populate senior management. That's a tendency. Uh, the book you mentioned earlier, Fear Your Strengths, associated with that book is a 360 survey that we came up with. And the rating scale that is not this 1 to 5 to what extent or from, inadequate to world class, but it's too little. This person does too little of that managerial attribute, the right amount or too much.
Hmm. Yeah.
Because right, you a lot of not what's counterproductive in a leader is not is taking something too far.
Yeah. Yeah. And you look at, I've said this before too, because I think it's true. Sometimes the people that we idolize or think are fantastic and put on pedestals as isn't this person amazing, uh, can be tortured souls. They could be way out of balance, and maybe they've achieved this very high level in this particular area, but sometimes you have to ask at what cost.
Absolutely. Uh, some considerable time ago, a couple of Harvard Business School professors wrote a book called "Must Success Cost So Much?"
Yeah.
And one of the prices you can pay is being a tortured soul. They're also, I recall, interested in the marriage, and people could be extremely hardworking, and as you often tend to have to be if you're a very senior person in an organization, however
Yeah.
small or large. But you can still have a good marriage, and it had to do with something they called expressivity. Can the husband and wife talk openly and well, even about difficult things? If they could, they had a good marriage by and large. If they couldn't, the marriage tended to suffer.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think just, yeah, talking about it and being transparent and saying, what you're feeling and what you're going through, on both ends of that, I think is extremely important. And yeah, we've all seen examples of people that that hardly work and have trouble with their marriages, and then we've seen people that work extremely hard and do fine in their marriages. So it isn't one fits all. That's for sure. It's I think you're right. It's communication.
It's communication. So on the now that we're touching on marriage, can I tell you one thing that I've discovered,
Absolutely. Let's hear
which
it.
which is widely known. It's not so much the problem; it's the solution. I think couples with, particularly dual career couples with kids at home, tend to make this mistake these days, and these days includes like the whole last generation. They don't get quality time together. It's back to expressivity. It's back to
Yeah.
communication. And in every marriage I've ever run across, parents have the two different instincts, tendencies with respect to raising the kids, discipline versus, being indulgent, um, uh, keeping them under pretty good control versus giving them independence, that sort of
Hmm.
thing. And if you're not talking across that difference, then you can have a lot of tension versus cooperate across those differences, and sort of call each other's number when the occasion requires it. But so, you know, couples who don't get quality time, then the relationship begins to deteriorate. That they get disconnected, and uh, and then the potential is to go get counseling and talk about their interpersonal problems. I think that the answer is for them to get quality time. It's structure.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
structure versus working on your relationship per se. Put the structure in place first. And I've seen this over and over again because you can tell I'm on the lookout for this, and I'm ready to offer this, solution. Uh, that's fundamental to how the couple is able to co-lead an organization.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think it's if you're gonna live with someone and build your life together with someone, you got to communicate, and you got to stay in love, and do those things that just if you don't, it's like anything. It's like we talked about leadership. It's like relationships. You have to work at them. They just don't happen. By osmosis, it's it takes effort and it takes intention and paying attention to those things, I do think make a difference.
I just add to that. I agree with that completely. It's creating the right conditions that are conducive to good communication. So then it's natural to have a conversation about how the kids are doing. It doesn't have to be hard work. I mean, I didn't. I would say to my wife, I don't want our time together, today on Saturday or Sunday to be a damned meeting.
Yeah, yeah,
I wanted to be a conversation. So
yeah.
when the kids were babies, we went out to breakfast at a fast food place because that was the one time during the day when we both stood a chance of maybe being rested. And and as they got
Yeah,
older, it turned into lunch or brunch, and then it landed at dinner time when they were
yeah,
older.
yeah,
But the conditions have to be conducive.
yeah. I can remember a personal story was lived in a neighborhood, and I traveled a fair amount, with my job, and so I was gone, and my wife was at home with the kids, and so a neighbor guy was in the same boat, and I overheard his wife talking to my wife one time. She goes, "God, I just get so tired of him coming home." And then he's tired because he's gone out to dinner with his buddies and they've done all these meetings, whatever. And so when he comes home, all he wants to do is lay on the couch and do nothing. And so I'd say, "Hey, you want to go out to dinner?" He goes, "No, I'm just too tired and whatever." And so I put that in my mind. And so uh, very intentionally, when I would come home and I'd be exhausted, and my wife would say, "Hey, do you want to go out to dinner?" I'd go, "Sure, let's go." Because you just have to take that other perspective and realize that it's not all about you.
Not all about you. It's a question of what's important, right? That's
Yeah,
what's
yeah,
what's really a priority.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you talk a little bit about in the book too that a lot of us or a lot of people have, what you call blockers, things that just kind of get in the way. And as you're guiding them to, be better leaders and do things more effectively, how do you find these blockers and how do you get them out of the way?
Well, it tends to be situational as well as personal, as well as inherent in the individual. So I'll give you an example. Um, I'm very interested in the cases where somebody is undermined. It could be that the manager doesn't give the person enough latitude, but it can also be the situation. So I was consulting a few years ago to somebody who had there were three or four people with their hands in the business that this guy was the general manager of.
Hmm.
His manager used to run the business. That was two cycles ago. The outgoing person still had his hands in the business.
Oh
The
boy.
the
Yeah.
COO was actively involved, and he took the job and without quite realizing it, he sort of pulled back. And then it showed up in the data that we collected. He's not engaged enough, he's not present enough, and I helped him. My colleague and I helped him to see that being undermined in that sense uh, got to him. It happened without him realizing it.
Yeah.
And he's a big, strong, capable guy, and he thought, "What? I let it get to me," and he sort of snapped back
Mm.
and got as engaged as the business and his team needed him to be.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting. You know, this seems like it's going to be a self-serving question, but you're a guide or a coach. I'm an executive coach. Why do you feel that is effective to have a coach? Why is that so important? And when in a person's career, when should they think about getting a coach?
Uh, in no way do I want this to be an advertisement. I just want this to be a practical exchange between you and me.
Yeah.
Um, it's hard to be objective about yourself,
Hmm.
and it's hard to that's on the outside. What impact am I really have? What works and what doesn't work
Yeah.
in the way
Yeah.
I conduct myself. Also, the underlying motivations are hard to put your finger on. And let's say you get feedback, and in some organizations, it's sort of dumped in the person's lap, and they don't know what really to make of it. And you need somebody who's schooled in you know feedback at least to bring out, hey, these are the themes, and this is the good things. These are the good things that you really ought to take in, and here are a couple of problem areas that you really ought to get after, and then help the person actually act on those priorities. It's, the other thing, as you well know, Steve, if golfers and need coaches, and all manner of athletes use coaches, then wouldn't it also apply to leaders and to you and me, at least in certain points, at certain
Yeah.
points in our life?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the question is like, why would the number one tennis player in the world need a coach if they're the number one tennis player in the world? Well, they all have them. And so it's an interesting thought. The other thing that I think is really interesting is in some people that I've talked to that have be, are very successful, let's say in their careers, a lot of them were had an intuition to get a coach early. Because I think what happens a lot of times is, people often don't get a coach until they're the CEO or until they're, in the top seat, where perhaps engaging a coach earlier on could help them better prepare for that job as opposed to doing, quite frankly, what I did. was when I became a CEO. I was scared to death because I didn't feel I was prepared. I didn't feel like I had enough business acumen to do that job. Therefore, it's like, oh my gosh, what do I do now? So, in hindsight, if I would have had some, maybe got a coach earlier on in my career, maybe I would have been better prepared for that position.
Yes. Uh, do you agree with the following, which is when something comes up in your life, maybe you're buying a house, or something goes wrong with your house, or uh, you want to learn to play a sport, it's natural to get somebody to help you do those things. Have
Exactly.
somebody who's good at it and also who you enjoy dealing with. And,
Yeah.
and to me, that applies to getting help with yourself.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's and then there's the reasons too. There's the, financial piece. Maybe I don't feel like I can afford that right now or whatever. But then there's also the time. It's so funny because I always remember the person in my company once said, I really need to hire somebody because I'm so overwhelmed, but I don't have time to interview them or onboard them if I hire them. It's just kind of like, okay, that's a problem. Okay, so if you need to kind of maybe take some short-term pain to get some long-term gain out of that or something, but putting it off because of finances or time sometimes is the natural thing we think about, but isn't very productive.
Yeah, we put ourselves in little mental boxes.
Yeah, yeah, that's for sure. So, and then this kind of is all about the same thing here, but I noticed in the book too that you identifying who I am is really important, and you would think that that would be, everybody knows that, right? Everybody knows who they are, but your experience, I suspect, has shown you that people aren't very objective, as you said earlier, or clear about that.
Well, in my own case, I don't know how I come across to you or to anybody listening to this, but I'm intense, and more intense than I realize. And my wife just told me like last week, holy cow, are you intense? And I was
Yeah,
thought I was relaxed, but still, I get an idea in my head. I can see how to get that thing done. I'm passionate about it, and for her, it's like standing in front of a freight train. So
yeah.
I'm not objective about how intense I am and how I come across to other people. It's good to be reminded.
And as a guide, working with clients, sometimes those are tough conversations to have, right? Because everyone has feelings and everyone has emotions, and sometimes you say something that pisses them off, and they're like, am I going to lose this client? Or are they going to say, I don't need you anymore, or whatever, or is it going to break through and help them get to where they go? It's a risk.
It's a risk. I've got an example of that right now. I'm starting to work with a key person under the person I've been consulting to for a year and a half. And that's a story in its own right.
Yeah.
And I'm meeting with this key guy just to help him, in part, work things out with
Yeah.
the head of the business.
Helping them communicate. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we've only met twice for an hour, and I've seen him, this guy, and I'm now talking with in meetings, his boss's meetings, and there are a couple of things that don't work well, and I'm saying to myself, when do I raise it,
Yeah.
and how do I raise it? Uh, and one thing is he takes too long to cover ground.
Hmm.
And my impression, not that generous, is he likes the sound of his voice. Um, but it doesn't matter. That's mildly prejudicial. The other thing, he has a tendency to, when he's presenting and then somebody interrupts and has a point of view on what he's saying, he'll say, "Right, right, that's right, right, right." And I don't think he knows he's doing that. So
Yeah.
when in the course of my work with this guy do I offer that to him? Because I don't want to, uh, harm the relationship with him.
Right. Right. No, that's tough, and I've been in those same situations too. And sometimes, it starts about trust. How much do they trust you? That's the first thing. But sometimes you do push too hard, and everyone's got, sometimes got a limit. Whether it's right or wrong, and like I said, you can lose a client or affect the relationship by saying something that cuts too deep.
People are sensitive.
Yeah, they are.
um,
Well, yeah, no, nobody likes to hear that you're doing something wrong, or that you're ineffective, or you're not being considerate to your people, whatever. Nobody likes to hear that. But if they are, um, gosh, what are you hiring me for if I'm not going to tell you that?
well, the burden on anybody like me or like you wanting to be helpful as a friend or a
Yeah,
professional is what's the time and the place and who are you dealing with? How sensitive is that person?
yeah,
Uh, is discretion is often the better part of valor.
yeah, absolutely.
Here's one, Steve. So let's say somebody in my life screws something up. Uh, do I say it's natural to say, "Hey, yeah, that was a problem," but it's already done. And if this sort of thing is not going to come up again, can't come up again until whatever next year at this time, why
Yeah,
would I raise it now? Why don't I tuck it away and next year keep an eye out for this?
yeah. Well, that's a risk too, because you usually need to, because if you don't, then it could fester and grow, without you knowing it, in your mind or their mind. And so sometimes you just need to address it right on, because dealing with it, if you can make it go away or cut down whatever emotion goes with it, you have a better chance of moving forward without the baggage.
Exactly. Um, can we go back to the use of positive feedback? I have one other thing I'd
Sure.
like to tell you about.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say, um, like in the case of the guy whose humility got in the way, then uh, put the name down player on his humility and eventually bracketed it.
Hmm.
So let's say we spend the morning going over what we call the appreciation report,
Hmm.
and he gets somewhere. He may not get all the way uh, uh, to accepting the positive feedback, but he's made some headway, and he's getting a bit of a boost in morale. You already brought this out earlier. If after lunch I put the concerns report on the table and we go over that, what's going to happen to the incipient gains? The beginning, incipient higher opinion of himself, and the good feeling that's associated with it. What will happen to it?
Yeah, well, it's he's going to focus on the negative, and that's going to go away.
So these days, once we cover the appreciation report and work on any of the blockers to the uptake of the positives, we're done for the day.
Mm. Save that for another day. Yeah.
Save it for another day. Here's an example of consulting to somebody who just was about to be promoted to the senior team, couldn't imagine herself at that level and in that spot. Told me she suffered from imposter syndrome.
Hmm.
So went over the positive feedback and tracked her carefully, stayed in touch, and she was feeling better about herself. And then early days, and now it's been 6 months. She's doing two things. She's reasonably confident, and also this voice in her, which is a downward pressure on her self value. She's managing to keep that at bay. And so we had a conversation. She said, well, "When am I going to get the concerns report?" And then she caught herself before I could say anything, and she said,
uh,
"That can wait."
yeah,
So
I can.
what's the point of what I was doing with her, right?
Yeah, let it.
What's the purpose? We serve the purpose. We've yet to go over the concerns. By the way, she knows what those things are. She
Yeah,
needs
yeah.
to
She doesn't
delegate
have
more.
to be told. Yeah, yeah. No, that's so true.
How about that as a way to create the conditions for somebody to grow, improve, get stronger, as you were saying before, inside?
Yeah, yeah. No, that's intuit. That's a great plan, great strategy because yeah, sometimes you don't need to say anything. I can remember, many times in my career, sometimes when someone has really screwed up and they know they've screwed up, the worst thing in the world you can say is you screwed up. I mean, sometimes you just need to go, give them a hug, or what's the point of bringing it up? I mean, they're already beating themselves up, So it's knowing knowing the personality of the person you're talking with is huge because how I deal with it with one person could be vastly different than another person depending on their personality type.
Definitely. And I like what you're saying. So the impulse is to, say something. Hey,
Yeah,
you screwed up. And the money's on checking that impulse when it's not going to help.
right, right. Yeah. What's the point? Is this going to help the situation?
I mean, it's managing yourself. It's sort of coaching yourself at the next level. You're
Yeah,
watching, anticipating. I mean, I do this a lot of the time. What move do I make next in
yeah,
life, not just in work? And I'll say to myself, sort of in passing, good move or not bad
yeah,
move.
yeah, yeah,
Generally, they're good moves, but it's about what move to make and what
yeah.
move not to make.
Absolutely. Well, Bob, in anticipation of our discussion today, we've covered a lot of ground, but is there anything that I haven't asked that you think we should make sure we get in the program?
So I would like to read an excerpt from one story to give people a feeling of these short stories.
That'd be great. Go ahead.
So Gideon is the chief operating officer in a large architectural firm, and he's a strong candidate to replace the head, who's the founder of that firm. The day before the fateful decision, Gideon says to his wife, Deborah, geez, there's so much riding on this. She says, as if I didn't know, I detest that place. The words exploded from her mouth. He says, detest? That bad? I had no idea. She says, of course you didn't. And he says, but hasn't the place been good to us? She says, she waves that aside. But we're able to send the kids to private school and look at where we live. She says, you can justify it all you want. Your life's out of whack, way out of whack. He says, don't we have to make sacrifices in life? She says, would you please get off of it, Gideon? You're trying my patience. He says, I can't do anything right. And she says, neither can I. And let this build up. And now the dam has burst.
Yeah, yeah. That happens more than we want to admit, I'm sure. Yeah,
Well, one thing to say about that it is these stories excuse me, aren't confined to work. You see
yeah,
the leader often with you know, his or her spouse,
yeah,
and you see the marital dynamic as well because it's one person in different settings. Sometimes they behave the same way. Sometimes there's a difference,
yeah,
and so
yeah,
these stories are whole life stories,
yeah.
including, as you were saying before, including some throwback to formative influences from childhood.
Yeah, yeah. Well, in the book, the stories are very compelling. I think you did a great job in coming up with those ideas. So, Bob, at this point in the interview, I always ask my guests the same common question, and that question is in relation to leadership. What is a pearl of wisdom that you could leave us with today?
Keep trying to improve, commit to improving, stick to the commitment. If you stand pat, you're not going to be the leader that you can be.
Yeah, yeah. Well said. Well said. So, is there another book in your brain there? You've written five. That's a lot. You got some more ideas?
Two more. One is a book that might be called Feedback is for Confidence,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
And I would write a couple of stories like the ones in Grappling to bring it to life.
Yeah.
And the other book is, which I'm like halfway through, is the stories of a person's career told in their own words. And I take that raw material and edit it into a good read. And these are people from all walks of life. I've got 15 or so, and uh, I won't stop until I've got 30 or 35.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I will say that this is not my purpose in writing that book, but every single story ends up being inspiring.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's what a good story does. I mean, that's why we tell stories, right? So good for you. That's awesome. Well, Bob, this has been a real pleasure sitting down talking with you today, and so you have a vast career of experience and helping a lot of people and writing great books. So thanks for all your effort and input in that, and wish you the best, and maybe we'll run into each other down the road someday.
I would enjoy it. Thanks so much for this experience, and I'm grateful for it.
Okay, take care. Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Bye bye.
Okay, bye bye. Thank you for listening to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. To listen to all my interviews, subscribe to Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and many other popular podcast platforms. Some of these interviews are on video, and you can search YouTube for Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson. You can also access the entire library of interviews on my website, orange.coaching.com, and that is orangetheword.coaching.com, and go to the Media Center and click on Podcasts or Video Gallery. You can also enter the website from pilpodcast.com.